right, hi, this is Geoffrey from Personality Cafe. I'm speaking with Liz from Personality Cafe. What's your actual Personality Cafe name?
It is, I think, Liz Casanova or Liz R.
Okay,
Casanova.
all right. I would have remembered all the middle letter there. Okay.
Definitely.
So I wanted to welcome you to Personality Cafe. I saw that you only have maybe a little over a dozen posts.
Yes, I'm brand
You're
new.
brand new. Okay. So I also commend you for your courage in going on video.
Thank you. I'm a little nervous, as
Yeah.
I said, or actually a lot nervous.
Really? What is it that's making you nervous?
It's interesting because I'm always been, oh, there you are again. I've always been very outgoing, but in any kind of, like I said, formal setting, uh, meaning one-on-one, I know that this is going to be recorded, like an interview setting, a speech setting in school. I always have struggled with it. My tummy gets in knots, thinking about it. Probably 2 hours before this, I started getting a little nervous, and and I feel nervous right now a little bit. And I may seem composed, but I'm not.
Okay. Well, I understand that. I guess it's strange, from my perspective, to think of an extrovert being nervous in a social situation.
Definitely.
But I know since you're an NF and I'm an NF, that makes us both sensitive. So
Exactly.
I guess that can mean sensitive to anything or
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And try and kind of before making any full conclusions on anything, it's based on the way we're feeling. And I think some of my past, I have had a little bit of panic,
Hmm.
and so I associate, not right now, I'm not worried about having a panic attack, but in speeches and stuff like that. So having that kind of in my neural circuits, reminding me of that and bringing those feelings up before common situations are about to arise.
Right. So was this like a debate team or acting or what kind of?
No, I just was in business school, and it was a ton of
All
presentations.
right.
And that's what's weird about it is I get up in front of people, but not in an informal setting. If I've done a ton of volunteer work, and I'm giving directions constantly, and I have no issue with that. But it's just when I know that I have to be in this structured, very formal setting, I get nervous.
Okay.
It's very, very, it's something I work on a lot.
Okay. Well, I can alleviate you maybe a little bit by just telling you there's not a whole lot of structure here. It's
No, I know, and I'm feeling
okay.
that. I'm feeling good now. I'm feeling a little
Okay.
more in my shoes.
All right. So let's see. One question. The first question, I guess, I'll ask is, do you, what is it, what is it that you hope to get out of, like an interaction like this?
I think a couple things.
Okay.
First, as we were talking about, and I've talked about online in some of the forums, I think for me personally, just becoming comfortable with really kind of exposing what's going on. I think ENFJs, at least for myself, we kind of live in this world of conflict where we may appear one way on the outside, but I think there's a lot more depth and a lot more to us on the inside. And also, I think that you seem very knowledgeable, and so I hope to kind of learn more from you. And also, you said you're an NF also,
Hmm.
an INFJ.
Yes.
And it's interesting because that one extroverted versus introverted, I would love to know what really kind of makes and pulls the differences, or if I can even notice them, because
Right.
since you're on a one-on-one setting, you don't seem too quiet to me, or I associate quiet with
Right.
it, which I don't think it's necessarily it. So just definitely personal growth, and then also learning more
Okay.
from you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've read. So there. You brought up two things. The first thing that I was thinking of is, I know that ENFJs, at least on the forums, sort of complain about, not in a bad way, but sort of, even though you might have a wide circle of friends, or a lot of ENFJs, several networks of circles of friends, that still there's that you want to still engage somebody on a deeper level, but because you're an extrovert and you get along with pretty much everybody, finding that depth in people.
And it seems impossible
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, okay. So, and that's fair enough. I guess I wouldn't have thought of extroverts having that kind of problem, but what I have an ENTP acquaintance who sort of said something the same, that all extroverts of any type, because they charge from people, are always going to be better about getting along with people in general, any type in general. But when you're an intuitive and an extrovert, because most extroverts are sensors, you're going to have a hard time finding the depth you're looking for most of the time, or being able to express the negative. I guess that would be the FE part for ENFJs, expressing the negative feelings on top of the positive feelings, because part of the social niceties is to always get along, and if you think that's your responsibility, that can be really draining on somebody to always be putting on a happy face, even if they don't
Absolutely.
feel happy. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And I think something that's interesting, and I really don't know if this is common to all extroverts or ENFJs, but I do know that what I've read on the forum and then what I've experienced myself is we almost can convince ourselves that we are happy. I mean, I was, have always been very social involved, and it was just the past probably year and a half where I've started therapy and kind of really went into what's inside, because I've never done that before, and I was in complete denial of a lot of things that just some things that happened in my past with my parents and family. I'd never felt anything until recently, and it's interesting because I think that's definitely a weakness or something that probably affects a lot of ENFJs, is really not going inside until they probably get to a point where there's kind of that hole is too big, and you're seeking that connection and you can't find it,
Right.
and you recognize it's likely it starts from within.
Right. Right. And maybe I'll seize on what you're talking about to sort of also talk about us as cousins in a way, 'cause
Definitely.
we're the same functions, but in a different order.
I like that.
It makes a huge difference. In fact, I couldn't understand why in the very beginning I was reading that ENFJs and INFPs had more sort of in common than ENFPs and INF. I'm sorry, than with ENFPs or INFJs. And I suspect now I've come to understand that dominant feeling, that your dominant structure is sort of your lens of seeing the world. So you engage first with feeling, and I don't. So I engage first with intuition. So
Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay.
So feeling, so it may seem a little selfish even, I guess, because we use extroverted feeling not just for the sake of using extroverted feeling like you would. We use extroverted feeling sort of in order to feed or generate things from our introverted intuition. And so I run or organize a meetup group with a lot of INFJs in it, and we love talking about ideas, and we go off, all over the place, but from probably an ENFJ or INFP perspective, when that happens, we're not speaking the language of feeling. We're speaking the language of intuition. So that can still seem a little, I don't know, maybe off-putting, where you can clearly tell when you have INFPs and ENFJs involved, because then we're talking the language of feeling instead.
Will you give an example?
Sure. An example of speaking the language of feeling is more that sort of engaging on the level of sort of a specific, even compliment. Maybe I think you're great. You're my best friend. Or sort of calling out the strengths of the other person, or engaging them in a social nicety. There's no water on the table, so you bringing water. Something like that. You could. I think an ENFJ and an INFP could engage on the level of feeling without engaging intuition and be comfortable at that level. Whereas an INFJ or probably an ENFP would not feel comfortable only engaging in the language of feeling.
Gotcha.
Okay. I mean,
So what were you
like
saying though as intuition or intuitive examples? That was
Oh, okay.
what kind of
it means talking about. We love talking about ideas. So I want to know why people think the way they do. You know what they think, how they came up with thinking that way, where they're basing that on, and generating sort of new ideas from that even. But there's not feeling involved in that necessarily. I mean,
Got it.
okay, it doesn't
That
mean like
makes
it's cold, but
right.
it can seem that way.
That's interesting. Because I had, that's something I'm definitely a newbie on learning about kind of how everything, what the letters represent, how they, versus what isn't the F is the way that I make conclusions, right, about the
Right.
world. And so I'm still very much I'm definitely learning.
Okay.
So your examples were helpful.
Okay. Thank you. See, and that's the kind of that's a feeling engagement you did right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And another example.
So right there you go. So and for me, the way I show, I guess my feeling engagement comes more across as interest in that person. So if I'm interested in what you think, which I am, that's a huge compliment. But it probably won't be processed as a compliment to an ENFJ or INFP without you having to take that extra, like, oh, he means that as a compliment kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So that's hugely different.
It's hugely different, yes. Yeah.
And then with the I versus the E, is that, I guess I really don't understand. I know that I acquire energy through people. I know that every time I was actually, like I said, I was a little nervous before this, but I definitely feel more lively now
Good, yeah.
by speaking with you. And is it just, what is the main difference of I and E?
Well, I mean, you have the main difference of the indicator, but just like you said, you're sort of developing your knowledge about the letters. The letters are just indicators, which means that that's like level 1 for MBTI, and it's important. And somebody could just learn about that level 1 stuff and still take away a lot from it, and maybe not delve any deeper, and they would still be able to see some value in that. But level 2 is the cognitive functions, which means it means you come to an understanding that the letters are, the reason we have the letters is just because it helps us find indicators on where this person's personality belongs. So if you see people saying, I'm an INFP sometimes and INFJ sometimes, that's fine from a level 1 perspective, but from the level 2 perspective, it's not fine, because there are different cognitive functions involved.
Right.
And so you cannot be both at the same time. And that's something you could have. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just asking, so the people that you've, talked with, do you find some people who are wishy-washy on, because I definitely have always tested. I've taken it probably 3 or 4 times since January and have not switched one bit. I guess sometimes the J and the P are, they have 3-point difference, but I'm always the ENFJ. Is there any personality type that does commonly do that, where they switch back and forth?
Sure. Well, they don't actually. What I would say is they don't actually switch, but
right, because they are likely just one.
They're
right?
just right. But the indicators are just like, I'm sorry, the instruments, which Myers-Briggs is one. All the free online tests are instruments which are trying to measure something. They may not always be measuring it accurately. So, for instance, if somebody says, "Well, I'm..."
Hold on, you're cutting out.
Oh, okay. Maybe let's...
Sorry, let's say. Will you say that again?
Sure. No, I derailed my train of thought.
Oh, I do that too frequently.
Let's see. Okay. Okay. So what happens, I think, with the instruments is that some of them are better than others, and if you have somebody that's even 1% P, for instance, say somebody measured INFP but only 1% on P, that doesn't. What it's saying is that the instrument is measuring that last indicator with a 1% confidence. So there's
Okay.
a really low confidence.
Right.
If it measured at if you have 100%, it doesn't mean that you're a stronger P. It just means that the instrument is measuring that trait with more certainty, with a lot more certainty.
That's
So,
interesting.
I don't know. I mean, there's a big difference between ENFJs and ENFPs. I think
Yes.
the best way to experience that for yourself is to, you know, wander or engage with those people and see if you fit in. You know how well you're, or how well you are relating to those people.
Right. Something I did recognize while I've completed the different assessments is that I really I want to respond one way, but I know that my behavior is another way.
Of course.
And especially because I definitely fell into kind of the habit of being in my inferior mode of thinking.
Yeah.
And I am just right now breaking out of it. I mean all through college, I mean I was, convinced I was this logical person because I just had, not, I kind of really did suppress this feeling part of me, even though it was there the entire time, and I
Right.
knew that. It's kind of, that's a paradox, but it's the truth. But it's interesting because I do still find myself, I guess I looked at it a couple weeks ago because one of my girlfriends was taking the test that I had printed off for her, and there were just ways I would want to respond and the way that I actually
Right.
am.
Right. Oh, I
And
understand.
so you feel that way too?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I think we aspire to certain things, and that might be a good or bad thing. I think it's good to develop at least an understanding of other ways of thinking, being, etc. But it can definitely put you into a lot of stress if you're trying to behave that way or trying to change your thinking to be a way other than it naturally is.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
it did happen for a while. And I think that's why, I mean, I was under a lot of stress. I mean, it was it wasn't necessarily apparent, but I think that kind of created a little bit of the anxiety that I've dealt with and stuff.
Oh, okay.
Because when you're not functioning the way that you were, made to function,
Right.
it kind of creates some conflict.
Right.
And I think that's when I felt it the most because, for instance, today when we were going to talk, I wanted to prepare for it.
Right.
What, I don't know what I'm going to be asked.
Right.
Are you kidding me? And I did. I wanted to think over the kind of answers, the potential questions. But I mean, I'm definitely one of those people that talks, I kind of feel and then talk, but I don't really think about it until it's coming out, if that makes sense. Or maybe it's very quick, but the gap is small. And I think just answering truthfully, it usually comes from what I'm doing right now, the spontaneous responses,
Sure.
instead of stopping, thinking, how do I want to respond, and then speaking.
Yeah. Well, I think for an ENFJ, I think you are being authentic when you are processing out loud. You're telling us
Absolutely.
what you think. Now, it wouldn't be for me in the same way. I'm I have to, even now, like when I have to pause and stop, I have to sort of process a little bit before I speak. Otherwise, I'm not going to be authentic, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
I will agree to things I shouldn't agree to. I'll do all sorts of dumb things if I don't stop and just process for just a minute before I speak to somebody about something.
And do you think that is what letter does that kind of fall into? Is that the way that's the cognitive functions is what you were talking about?
It's the order of the cognitive functions. It's my preference for introverted intuition over extroverted feeling. You have the opposite
Right.
preference, right? So you are processing in the objective real world. That's FE, because anything with an E on it sort of indicates that that function is occurring out in the real world.
Right.
And that's your world. My world is, and I'll use FE to help my NI, and you would use NI to help your FE. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that we have different ways of being authentic.
Right.
So it's not fair for instance, when introverts, uh, you know, sort of make generalizations about extroverts, they're not being authentic because they're talking out loud. Well, that's not fair. That's how extroverts are authentic.
Right.
It just wouldn't be authentic for an introvert to do the same thing. That's all. Just a difference.
That makes sense. I have never really thought about it, but I did want to ask when you were talking about ENFP,
Hmm.
because I said I've taken it 3, 4 times ENFJ, but there was one time where there were three, which is actually kind of a difference. 3 points on the test that comes in. Please understand me too,
Yes.
or whatever,
Hmm.
and there are parts of the ENFP, of course, just like it's probably that way in multiple, of all the 16 personality types. But what are the primary differences? Because that actually is very confusing to me. The ENFP versus the ENFJ. And
Okay.
what are kind of the trait differences that you see? I'm definitely example oriented.
Okay.
So,
Well, I mean, all of it's because MBTI is trying to discover a couple of things that are hard to figure out, like your natural preferences. Well, when Jung talks about a midlife crisis, for instance, he says essentially what's going on is we're born with a certain way of being, and then our parents, even if they're very supportive, teach us to be a certain way, and we accommodate our true selves to that way of being. So that's called the accommodated self, and eventually we begin to question the authenticity of that accommodated self, and that struggle is going to be more difficult for somebody with really oppressive parents, and less difficult with somebody who has understanding parents or accepting parents. But eventually you have to cast off that part of yourself which is accommodated, and instead accept yourself for who you are, which is often a different or very different person than who you've been previous to that point, when you've
absolutely.
been accommodating. Yeah. So okay, once again, I lost track of your question this time. Which was okay. Sorry.
No, so the P versus the J, but you had mentioned in the ENFs, but then you also did mention a midlife crisis, and I think you were leading up to that.
Okay. Yes. So it's hard. So sometimes it's going to be just very difficult to figure out what's going on until people have reached that point in their lives. And but what I noticed with ENFPs versus ENFJs is, for instance, ENFJs I think have a quiet authoritativeness, which they themselves often can appreciate. So I notice it with you. You may not think of yourself as authoritative. It's not. It's not intrusively authoritative. It's just quiet. It's there. And the emphasis is on connecting with people. So it's sort of connect with people, and then reprioritizing and prioritizing those relationships, which leads to incredibly busy but structured um, uh, personal lives. So and work lives too. So, for instance, even in the meetup group, we have a lot more ENFPs that join us than ENFJs.
Right.
The reason being, I suspect, that ENFJs already have a full social calendar, so fitting something new in makes it, it's difficult. Um, Whereas ENFPs, their primary way of being is sort of more open. They don't want to have to plan unless you have to. They want to sort of always be stimulated by new mental ideas, and they're comfortable in that place. So it doesn't cause them stress to not be scheduled.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, that's something I mean, I had
That's
trouble.
very different. Yeah.
Yes, very different. And I had trouble understanding that. I was like, how could anybody feel more comfortable not, putting a date on the calendar and knowing that, okay, that's when it is,
Right.
not having to wonder. But that's my problem because actually there are quite a few people, the P's, who are prefer to live their lives that way. And the benefit to them and to society is that they're because they're leaving all their options open to the last second. They have the ability to adjust quickly. They have the ability to bring a lot of energy to a situation on the spur of the moment.
Yes.
Right. So
I,
very different than what I'm getting off of you.
Yeah, it's very different.
Yes.
Because there was at one point I downloaded on Amazon the ENFJ, like the 99 cents book, and then
Okay.
the ENFP
Right.
just to get the overviews. And sometimes I'm spontaneous, but that scheduling thing, I mean, I'm not that spontaneous when it
Right.
comes down to it. But that's so different. And that is, I still have a really hard time understanding, I guess, how they're processing. Like you said, I'm
Right.
still on the level one of even understanding what the letters really mean.
Right.
But so, I mean, they're processing the world completely different,
Yes.
obviously, if they
Right.
can function that way.
Right. And I mean, I guess that's the beautiful thing when you have those kind of epiphanies about just how different people really are. You know, yeah, we all have the same. We're all part of the same species, but the way we experience life and go about experiencing life is, I think, alien to some degree, until you develop a keen awareness of what is yourself versus what is the human condition. You know,
Definitely. And that's something that kind of just triggered. I've been with my boyfriend for 9 years. We've been together a long time. He's an ISTJ. So very, very different. Very,
Right.
very different. And I've always loved that about him. But something that I just finally accepted and really have embraced. And when we've had conflict, and with him it's very rare because, a lot of the time, I mean, who knows, there may be inner turmoil, but you've got to press for it if you're going to find out. But to me, when I'm upset, I want to get it all out. I just want to, it's like the floodgates have opened, and my mouth just can't stop. So I just keep on talking, got it out, and it's very short term, or not always, but usually. And with him, he kind of shuts down, can't talk, at that moment until after he's thought about it and comes back and then can discuss it. And I used to get so angry when it would happen. Why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you saying anything? And to now understand that is literally the way he processes information. He cannot take it all in, process it right there, and spit out information. He needs time alone. And to know that has just been so, I guess, calming to me, because when there has been conflict, it was almost like I did take it personally. What, he's not going to talk right now? Are you kidding me?
Right.
I just couldn't understand it. And it's just been really kind of like a revelation, to be honest, because it's very, very different the way that, we handle the information when we're upset.
Right. I think my wife's an ISTJ. We've been married for 16 years, and we were dating for about 5 years before that. So we've been together a long time.
Awesome.
The hurdles that you have to overcome whenever you cross a quadrant, I think, are significant. So I think the best thing and the best advice I can give anybody who's doing that is to see a relationship counselor before there are problems in the relationship.
Right.
Because what typically happens is people wait, and this is what happened to us, is, things had to get really bad, and we waited, 5-6 years before we sought help, and then it's, makes it that much more difficult to work through these issues that have now been, festering for years and years.
Now, did the therapy help a lot? Because that's something, I guess, that was a struggle just for me personally, finding a therapist that I found credible, that I could open up to, especially because you mentioned this earlier, but when it comes down to it, I've been surrounded by a lot of people. I'm invited to a ton of weddings. Like, I know a lot of people, but when it comes down to it, that's where we're at in our lives right now.
Right.
I'm about to be 26, but I truly have struggled for that connection. I really have never felt like anyone truly, truly, truly understands me. And I think Matt, my boyfriend, is now finally, as I'm starting to expose myself a lot more because of therapy. And so that tangent was because I wanted to know, was it a kind of a struggle to find a therapist that you found credible to deal with? Because it's one thing dealing with one person, but if you're going to deal with two people, I mean, they've got to be real good,
Yeah. My advice, and I think the more serious people take it, the better. I mean, not that they have to, just is to, if you're an NF, then none of the other temperaments are going to be able to help you, I think, really, when it comes to therapy. Only another NF who is training in psychology is going to be able to understand that perspective, because it's very, I think NFs can understand the other, because empathy is sort of one of our traits.
It's universal among all four
Yes.
traits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And the way we express it and experience it is different, but it comes naturally to all of us.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, the other types can certainly experience empathy, but it takes energy. It is whereas we can just exist in a mode of empathy without it costing us anything. It costs them energy. It makes them uncomfortable to do so. And once you read about all the different types, that makes sense. How can an NT do their or be objective if they're constantly trying to be empathetic at the same time? Those two things don't mix.
Right.
Right? But
Right.
but how are you going to help somebody who needs empathy and whose primary way of being is to be empathetic if you're not the same way?
That's a really good point.
So our therapist is an ENFJ.
That's awesome.
And I would encourage you to at least ask about type, or be looking for type when you're dealing with a therapist.
Right.
And the better an understanding you get with Myers-Briggs, the easier that becomes.
I am now very curious to see if my current therapist is at least an NF, like you said,
Right.
because maybe that's what I mean. I didn't used to cry in front of anyone. I mean, I was a
Right.
hot mess,
Right.
until finally kind of really breaking down some barriers. And it's a slow process to accept. When you wanted to, I definitely grew up in a thinking family,
Okay, right.
and both my parents very, 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 very competent, and I mean that in an intellectual sense. We're competent in other ways, and I've learned that now. But so to rid that and accept that is not a major part of me. I'm not gonna make decisions based on logic and objectively. Right. I mean, I think about it all the time. Particular things I do on a daily basis. I'm like, well, I have a lot of evidence that says you shouldn't do what you just did.
Right.
And it's the truth. And so I think, and I wonder if other ENFJs and even just NFs in general struggle with that. And like you said, the family and the environment has a huge thing and influence on that. But I just, especially kind of the way that our society's structured,
Right.
to really value the intellectual school intelligence. I wonder if that, if other people, or a lot more people than they know, struggle with it. What do you think?
I think that's definitely true with feelers in general. I would say, not just intuitive feelers, but the special struggle that intuitive feelers have is that on top of making decisions based on feeling instead of necessarily full logic, that we also have the additional handicap. It's not a true handicap, a handicap in the sense of relating to sensors, that we don't have the details. We can't call up the details to support even our feeling judgments. We just know what it is that we're going to do, or what's the right thing for us, or sometimes we think we know what's right for other people too. But all that comes from the unconscious, and NFs are creatures of the unconscious versus sensors, who are very much creatures of the conscious mind. In other words, what can I hold in my mind all at the same time? What facts do I have, and what conclusions can I draw from those facts? The problem is and you need that. You need a lot of that to make civilization work. But the problem in communication comes between that and NFs, in that you can hold a lot more information in your unconscious mind than your conscious mind.
Right.
And when you allow your unconscious mind to process that information for you, the input or the feedback you're getting back from your unconscious mind is feeling. That's why we can feel strongly about something without understanding the reasons behind it. It's because
Right.
our unconscious minds has already made its determinations and is just trying to communicate that to our conscious mind.
Now, but with the unconscious mind, do we still at times function on various beliefs and kind of values that aren't relevant anymore? Because if stuff's coming from our unconscious mind, a lot of things that we suppress goes back there. A
Sure.
lot of, so does that occur when we're making decisions? A great example is even today, me being anxious, not totally, but still, I didn't have really any evidence, from the
Right.
sensing to feel that way. But I mean, that was kind of I feel like an example of a belief that I formed early on. You're going to get nervous, you're going to screw up and say something stupid.
Oh, okay.
And it was kind of projected.
Yeah. Well,
And
what you're talking about are automatic thoughts.
okay,
I'd encourage you to just Google that. You'll find a lot of information. But yes, we definitely have ways of thinking that get automatic. That when we think them over and over again, become automatic in a sense. And if they're unhealthy ways of thinking, that certainly can affect us negatively. That's why I think for intuitives in particular, the journey of just self-awareness is so important, because the more aware you are of who you are and where your thoughts are coming from and all of that, the more ultimately the more control you have over your behavior.
right.
And I think maybe it might be more natural for ENFJs to understand that difference between feeling and behavior. Your feelings and your thoughts are never wrong. You're not
Right, they definitely point to
right.
truth.
Okay, you're never. They're never bad. They're never, and you're not responsible for them. What you're
Right,
responsible for is your actions.
right.
Okay. Now, I've noticed that ENFJs tend to intuitively understand that, whereas I'm not sure INFJs do. I think very oftentimes we try to control how we think and how we feel, and I think that's what leads us into destructive processes that are more. I guess that's more an INFJ kind of thinking pattern. But what I'm hearing from you that is a struggle that I don't think we necessarily have as much is to trust our intuition and to trust our feeling as being right for us. And
Gotcha.
I tell most NFs that I meet, you're not an ESTJ. So for them, yeah, they need to trust their sensing and their thinking. That's what's right for them. But if you're an NF, then what's right for you is to trust your intuition and your feeling. And if an ST or an SF or an NT doesn't understand that, that's not your problem. You have to do what's right for you and your way of being in this world.
I feel like we need to have a revolutionary war because there's so many people that, or I mean, I don't know how many NFs there are, but I feel like when it comes down to what you were just saying, we were not raised to believe that. We were raised to be thinkers and to be, I mean, to literally make it based on objective evidence. What's out here, our senses, and but that's kind of shitty, Like I wish that it wasn't that way. And so I feel like, yeah, there needs to be a change for that. I
Right.
don't know how, but
Right.
I mean, our world is not structured, or at least especially our American society is not structured that way at
Right.
all to kind of function around us,
Right.
the NFs.
Right. And it's not for me. It's not even to function it around us. It's more just to have a space where we can
And allow us.
yeah, allow us to exist and to be accepted for who we are. And so, yeah, I guess I have a sort of utopian fantasy of a sort of creation of a space of an NF, not a different country, even just maybe a neighborhood,
I
or
like it.
yeah, I think and a place where the schools would be ours, for our children, not for and so that they could be accepted for who they are. Because this what you're talking about is something I hear all the time from all NFs, that I wasn't accepted for who I was, and that that's quite a psychological handicap to impart to a child who then has to grow up feeling that way until I think for me the revolution was at 35. So, or 34 actually. that's a long time. It shouldn't have to take that long.
What
And
was the impetus, do you think?
for me, it was I got physically ill, um, and once I realized sort of I don't want to be mean. I'm gonna say a general lack of compassion from family and friends
Absolutely.
that I just wasn't prepared for. I sort of always figured that, if somebody goes down, then you help that person get back up, and then you can move on together. But I think the general sort of way of dealing, I don't know, maybe they do register as compassion. It's just sort of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. They give you that speech, and that's all you get. And, that's not compassion. That's not empathy. That's not even sympathy. So,
Right.
so once I felt very, very alone, and
Oh, I can't even imagine. I was just
yeah,
thinking that you had to.
I was, and until I reached out and met this group of NFs in this meetup group, and for the first time in my life, I felt alive, accepted, and that I was receiving the same kind of empathy that I am giving. And so I think it's a very important space, and I think I encourage actually from the beginning, even at Personality Cafe, I said you need to interact with other NFs. Not even, and I think that it's important to do it in real life as well, not just. I mean, and I would consider this real life, but not just. Um,
Absolutely.
Even if you're an introvert, not just in writing, that it needs to be a little bit of face-to-face energy. So, and I think,
Yes.
and I thank you for your compassion. That comes across.
Oh, it's cutting out again. Hold on one second.
Okay.
It's cutting out. All right. You said, I think,
Oh, I said I thank you for your compassion. I could feel that energy from you.
well,
So it's
you're welcome.
appreciated.
That's just, but it makes me so happy that that's not where you're at anymore because I
Right.
think that's something that makes me kind of tear up when I think about it. I know that there's so many people out there right now that feel quite alone and don't really know why, can't really put a finger on it. They feel like they've gotten past a lot, and it's so nice that there are people out there that were there,
Right.
and I mean that had to be kind of just like, oh, bricks off your shoulder when you
Right.
met all of them.
Right.
And I wonder, did you start that group, or was it already formed, or?
It was teetering on the edge of extinction, I guess, and through no fault of the organizer, she had so much going on in her life where she really, the time she was devoting to it was really more time than she had. But I met, in fact, so I live in the Los Angeles area, and I found out about Meetup, and I found a highly sensitive persons group down in San Diego, and I was gonna drive down there, and I emailed the person, and she's like, "Well, you're welcome to drive down here, but there's a group that's like right next door." So I was like, "Oh, okay, well."
Right.
So I found that group, which is MBTI Intuitives of Los Angeles, and I eventually took the reins of that group, not as a sort of or more as just organizing events on a semi-regular basis so that people could depend on those meetings occurring a couple times a month at least. And I also started an intuitive feelers group, but there's a lot of crossover between the groups, and I think because of the place I was in, I wasn't as not as caring. I was not as open to trying to understand the NT perspective, but NTs also feel a lot of isolation because of their intuitiveness and because actually their lack of people skills. A lot of them, because they're trying to be objective. A lot of them or a lot of what I hear from NTs is that people don't appreciate my objectivity or that I'm trying to be objective. And to them, I think that's fairness. They're trying to be fair. From the NF perspective, sometimes it seems like fairness, and sometimes it seems like lack of compassion. But
Right.
but it's right for them. So
Right.
and it's their struggle, and so that group is open to all intuitives, NFs and NTs
That's
alike.
neat because it opens up people's eyes,
Right.
I mean, like you said, it can come off objectively, but also from an NF's perspective, listening to an NT, or I feel like thinkers in general sometimes, um, since I can't really specify or
Right.
categorize it, but it it's always nice to hear that, because when being just simply given more awareness of how people function differently and the way they view something. I mean, the values, the difference in values. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff, and
Right.
it's nice because I feel like no one, I wish for the world no one would feel misunderstood.
Right.
And I sometimes it seems like it's almost like an epidemic.
Right.
And so I am really interested in finding out more about that, actually, because I would love to. I don't know if there's something here where I am locally, or because that is something I've recognized when I think about it. The people I am friends with, I'm not sure if I have any good NF
Hmm.
friends. I don't think I do, actually.
Yeah. That's very isolating then, if that's the case.
Right.
It may not be true though. What I can tell you is that I thought, because most all my family are SJs pretty much. SJs, a few SPs. I just found out just recently my little sister, who is 16, is an NF. Also, she's an INFP. But for the most part, I'm essentially we're the only two intuitives, and for a long time I thought I didn't have any intuitive friends until I started asking some of my past friends, do you know your MBTI type? And lo and behold, one of my friends from my writers group, INFJ, one of my very good friends from, or best friends growing up, he's definitely an IN. I can't quite figure out the last part of it, but I was very thankful. I felt so alone, and it was one of those, not to get religious, but it felt like that. Remember that footprints poem? Uh,
Oh, where like God picks you up and you can't see the footsteps,
right.
or yes, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so it sort of restored my faith a little bit to see that I really hadn't been as alone as I thought.
Right.
Yeah, but some people really are. So quite a few intuitives that come to this group, or intuitive feelers in particular, they're struggling with issues of acceptance, or I should say lack of acceptance and lack of compassion, and the space really has become populated, which is exactly what I wanted.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That
And
has, I
yeah,
mean, just to see what it's done and how many people, you know, were right there with you, and how, I mean, that's life changing for people to know that they can go somewhere each week
right, absolutely. Yeah,
or whenever you guys meet.
yeah, about once a week. You're right.
It's really neat. Really want to see if there's something like that where I'm at.
Okay.
Is it common?
You know, there are a lot of groups around in the bigger areas. I'm not sure about in Missouri necessarily. I know there are big areas in Missouri, but I don't know
Right.
necessarily. But I just started a group called Worldwide. I can't even remember what it is now. MBTI Coffee House, based on the Facebook group, and that's a space where anybody from anywhere can post a meetup and try to assemble people. So you're welcome to post there.
Awesome.
I'll send you the link after we're
Yes,
finished.
please do. That would be great. Well, while you were talking, one other question I had was, I don't understand what my N means. I
Okay.
do not get it. I can't get it. Well, I can get it, but I feel like it is a struggle for me. I've read a ton on it. So I'm hoping that maybe an example, or
Okay.
I'm very, like I said, I need examples.
Okay. See, intuition is different from sensing in not that we can't do both. Oftentimes, we're required to do both. Just life requires us to do both. But what it has to do with more is the energy drain we experience when we try to undertake that task. So sensing is more about real world details and coming up with really detail oriented information, and that's where they live. They're comfortable in sort of with very concrete, um, or living in a very concrete way, not so much interested in the ideas behind it or understanding the scheme of things or the meaning of things. And so intuition, well, and I'm putting that in an intuitive feeling kind of way. Actually, intuition in general is more general into interest in the abstract,
Okay.
in ideas and stuff like that. Intuitive feeling, that's where we all share a quest for meaning of some kinds. For identity is another one, and different subtypes experience those in different ways. The quest for meaning for an INFP, for instance, is identity is very strong, because of that introverted feeling, trying to establish those values and a congruity between what their personal values are and how they and others act in the world, outside. So, and for INFJs, it's definitely meaning is very, very important. Trying to find out, what is the purpose of life? Why are we here? What meaning do my actions have? Those kind of things. And I'm not really sure all of us share those things, but I think certain aspects of being an NF present more strongly in each type. So I'm not sure what what that might be for ENFJ or ENFP, but certainly because of the way we go out and interact with the world, there's got to be a difference or some emphasis that you would feel more strongly about than we would necessarily. And
Right. I think I mean this is completely what came to my head. I have no idea if this
okay,
is true, but it resonates with me. I think definitely, like you said, the identity factor pertains to knowing that you've improved yourself, but you've also improved the people around you or the people in the world. I feel like that's something that I'm drawn towards quite frequently. All the volunteering that I do, I want to know that I'm going to make someone else's life happy, and that in effect makes mine very, very happy. So I think it's kind of the personal development focus on two groups
okay,
for an ENFJ. I don't know if I would love to know if other ENFJs agree, but
well, you have to ask them.
yeah, I think I will.
Yeah, but I think even if you read the description in Kiersey, ENFJ he calls a teacher, which has those very aspects you're describing right now. I think at its best, and I'm trying to think. Have I ever met a mean ENFJ? I don't think so.
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably. Unless we're pissed, we're not that nice when we're
Right.
pissed.
Well, nobody is. I mean, and
Right.
INFJs are, we can be outright cruel. I think probably comes more easily to us, that switch. I think for ENFJs, I don't know. You can probably take a lot more than we can. We sort of, once we get to our boiling point, we just turn. It's an instantaneous thing.
Right.
It's kind of scary, actually, when that happens. I don't like to feel that way or to be that way, and so I try just not to put myself in those situations. But it can
Right.
happen. But
Because it's no fun when that inner child is driving the bus.
right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's what we act like. It's
Yes.
the truth.
Right. Yeah. No, that you're right, and that's something that's part of our struggle, I guess. Or and we experience stress in different ways. Have you read the book? Was That Really Me?
Oh my gosh, yes, and
You
that
did? Okay.
would yes. I worked in my inferior mode for
Okay.
a minute or two.
Okay. Likewise, yeah. And actually, even reading, at one point I was thinking INFP, and it wasn't until I read that book that I realized that, because the example that she gives was exact. I mean, it was exactly how
What was it?
It was how I handled being sick. And
Oh yes, and you have a prime example of
right.
that.
So, getting all the records I could from everywhere and ordering and reordering all the information. Essentially, I was trying to help the doctors, get the information they needed to make a proper diagnosis. And but it's when an IFJ is stuck in that, our inferior is SE, so
Okay.
we get totally swamped in the details and stop.
Makes sense.
Yeah, we can't get out of it, and that's That's where I was for a long time, more than just a minute, more like
So
a
just
couple minutes.
oh, my minute meant about, yeah, some years.
Okay.
So you were just compiling information,
Yes.
trying to make sense of everything, trying to, I mean, were you trying to arrive at the conclusion, or was it right? And
Yes.
that's not usually how you guys are at all.
No. Not with trying to take little minute details and trying to build something out of those. It's more like we'll read it, we'll look at the details, but we're not trying to keep all that in our head
Right.
and structure it and then make a conclusion based on that. It's more like we take in the information and then we go with what our intuition tells us, which is essentially allowing our unconscious mind to do its work, in an INFJ, and compile that information for us unconsciously, and then give us the answer.
Right.
It seems sort of lazy, I guess.
Not building an
Yes.
argument like a lawyer does. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
That's,
Exactly.
and that was just kind of your confirming moment.
Yeah, that one was really big because up until then I really hadn't doubted INFP, and it also, and then as I sort of branched out and started talking with INFJs, it made a lot more sense that I thought I was INFP because I was stuck in the present moment. Stuck meaning that's not where it's really healthy for me to be.
Right. Right. We're always forecasting,
Right.
it seems like.
Right. And so
And as are you, correct?
yes, yeah, correct. I mean now, and I realized that where I was not. I was very, very stressful.
Just
Not-
1 second, it's cutting out.
Okay, yeah, I can kind
Sorry.
of see it. That's okay.
Hold on.
Are you back?
Geoffrey, just 1 moment. I heard stressful, but that's it.
Okay. That it's very stressful for me to not live, in a planned. It doesn't have to be planned. I don't want it to be planned out to every minute, but
Right.
in a sort of planned, moving forward, moving ahead kind of way. And INFPs, it's natural. It's not. What would be stressful would be to live in a very planned and scheduled way. So I realized later that even in the MBTI instructions, it says don't take this test when you're stressed, when you're sick, a number of other things, because all those things are going to change how you answer those questions.
Right. That makes sense. Wow. Yes, I completely agree about that book. Once I read kind of the way it happens, and, because, I mean, a great example is when I was a little, I mean, my mom said I came out and I was screaming. I was very, very emotive and, I was reactive to everything, whereas my older sisters definitely, I do not believe, at least, well, she's not an EF, right?
Right.
What would it be? But I mean, and so I guess I was 5 or 6, and she said, if you go 30 days without throwing a temper tantrum, you get a movie, and it was Sister Act. Great movie, by the way. And
Yes.
I haven't seen it in a minute, but I love it. And I can remember that moment because, I mean, what it represents is you're not allowed to express your anger. You're not allowed to
Yes.
express your sadness. And I know that it wasn't intentional. My mom that was, I mean, not a great parenting move, but it really did shoo me away from my natural way of functioning.
Right.
And then, but they use these examples of as a child, and then, how it progresses and how you become a thinker ultimately and start functioning in your inferior mode. Literally, kid you not, 1.5 years ago before I started therapy, I studied for the LSAT for 1.5 years, did incredibly well on it because, I have to prove a point, but it was so difficult for me. It didn't come easily at all, that logic. And now I'm absolutely not going to law school. I love people. I love interacting with people and helping people. I don't want to be in a career where, like you said, building stuff up and you have to find the evidence. And it's just, it's not something I would want to do. But that book was absolutely one of the most insightful things I think I've read in kind of this journey of really being true to myself and accepting myself for the way that I am, because
Right.
that is something that's very hard to accept. That, I mean, the way we function is very differently than a lot of people, and it's like we talked about earlier, not necessarily accepted
Right.
as much as I would like it to be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, And hopefully you're finding some of that acceptance on Personality Cafe.
Yes, I
Okay, good.
absolutely am.
Yeah.
And it's nice to know something that's important to me is people can relate. I think that gives me a lot of hope because there are, as you said, there are times when you're just like, golly, like no one gets me. You've been there, you said, and
Yes.
that's something that I felt a lot until I started therapy. I just didn't understand why, from the outside looking in, people think I'm this confident, put together, have got my shit together is basically what everyone thought, but I really inside was kind of really hurting. And
Right.
but knowing that there are other people living that way and that we can all kind of come together. And I know, is this an NF thing to say? It's very
Yeah.
inspiring.
Yes. Yes. and it, and and our journeys are, there's a lot of overlap, I think, in the NF journey in general because we are such a small part of society, mostly marginalized. I'm always jealous in a good way, not jealous like I would want to take it away from them, but jealous that I didn't have it too, kind of thing. When people tell me they were raised by, intuitive parents,
Oh my gosh.
I think that makes it, and you can see it in their personality, that they are accepting of their own intuition and don't feel compelled to have to go out and cite everything and know everything and know every little detail about something. They're
Is that
comfortable
why
not.
I'm that way? That makes
Probably.
sense.
Yeah.
So you've met some people that were raised by
Intuitive
intuitive
parents.
parents and they don't do that.
Nope. Nope.
That
They're
is really
comfortable.
interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's not to get down on our parents. Obviously, in a default mode, we raise, people want to raise their children the way, either the way they were raised or the way they would have liked to have
Opposite.
been raised. Yes,
Yeah.
or opposite. Yeah. So it's a much more difficult thing to say who is my child and what do they specifically need. And
Absolutely. And I think that's something where, I mean, in itself, our society hasn't functioned that way. We haven't recognized, it's only a very small portion where they recognize people function differently. So, a lot of people I believe that are having children are in pure ignorance. They don't recognize these needs, these absolute, and I don't usually like to use that word need. It's only usually want, but it's really now that I've recognized that this is literally the way their brain is processing information. And by that alone, it is a need. Children of different personality types have very, very different emotional needs,
right,
especially.
right,
And I think, yes, I don't think it's the parents that are intentional. I just think it's functioning off of some of their childhood wounds and then also just the lack of awareness.
right. Yeah, and that's something, or that intention thing is something that I think it brought me a lot of peace, and I think it probably brings a lot of other intuitives peace too, to realize that what people are doing, there's not a bad intention there most of the
Right.
time. It's a good intention. It's just not the right way.
Right.
It's just the methodology that's wrong. So, and I think intuitive feelers in particular can still have love or appreciation for somebody who had a good intention, regardless
Yes.
of whether it's carried out in a healthy or positive way.
Right. And I think that how many siblings did you say you had?
I have one younger sister, one younger sister by our mutual mother, and I have a half sister and half brother. But we're together so a lot. We don't call each other half brother, half sister, just brother and
That's
sister. Yeah.
that's neat. And you said the two oldest are SJs
No,
or T. What'd you say they were?
I didn't say. I just
Oh.
my parent. I talked about my parents.
Okay.
My first little sister is
Is
an SP, probably ISTP. My little sister is just 16. She's probably an INFP. And my little brother, who's 4 years younger than that, so what does that make him? I guess he's 12. So 12 this last September. He is definitely an SP of some kind, probably ISTP. Although he's a little too young still to say that with certainty.
right. So do you ever see your parents when they're, because he's young, when particular ways that they deal with discipline or encouragement. And there are times you're like, this may not be the right way, or oh, that's a good, that definitely probably works really well with his personality type. Are you able to? Because I feel like you're quite informed. Are you able to kind of identify?
The problem is, I call it the sensor conundrums. My own thing is that if you're an abstract person, if you're an intuitive, you are interested in seeing the other perspective.
Definitely.
Okay, and that includes, so I think that's why I said intuitive feelers in particular, I think, are interested in seeing and understanding all other perspectives. SJ perspective, SP.
Which can bring us into some issues, though,
Yes.
when you're being trying to be assertive.
Yes, right. And exactly, and that's a typical NFJ thing, I think, is you start to see the other person's perspective against your,
Right.
take your own, you'll take their perspective against yourself on occasion, which is very unhealthy. But
Absolutely.
But sensors, because they're not interested in the abstract, so it's not a defect, but they're interested in their own perspective, and they're not so much interested in stepping outside of that perspective to understand other people's perspectives. I'm not saying it's not possible. One psychologist I saw, probably an ESTJ, very compassionate. When I start harboring really negative feelings against STs, I always think of him for a moment. It doesn't, like, STs are driven to be the way they are by society. They get rewarded for being, more and more nasty and workaholic and judgmental, because that's what corporations want, right?
Right.
But it doesn't have to be that way. And this one psychologist, for example, he had a lot of compassion. He went about things very differently than an intuitive would have. With like giving tests, and then he had data to work with, to reach his conclusions. But he wasn't wrong,
Right.
and he did it compassionately.
And I'm assuming your wife is similar to that?
I think we are working on that now.
Right.
I think the biggest problem that we have is miscommunication.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think that, I don't know if you do this, but I know that a fault of mine is that we're very, very, as NFs, very, very considerate. And I think, and it's not that Matt is very, very considerate, but it's not the same things I would think of, and sometimes I'm unfortunately kind of blanking on an example, but I mean, there's been multiple times where even something, I come home from dinner and I brought him dinner. He doesn't think of that always. And it's not against me. It's just he assumes it's 8 p.m. Liz would have eaten by then,
Right.
And it's definitely interesting, though, just communicating, this is my needs, this is what I want from you. And once you do that, especially at least what I've observed with Matt as an ISTJ, that he's if I give him a definite, this is what I need or want, he's very, very receptive. But any ambiguity in my direction, absolutely not. It's
Right.
not going to be likely fulfilled. And he's going to watch us be like, Liz, what do how are you going to say that? But I mean, it's the truth, and it's interesting. I'm interested if you've noticed that also.
I think, have you read the 5 love languages?
I read like half of it on audio.
Okay. I think that book's great in sort of understanding that it's, even though we give the kind of love we want to receive, and really to grow up, I mean, in a relationship, you have to learn to give the kind of love that the other person wants. And I think that's where we cross, and I'm at fault here too, because for instance, one of mine is words of affirmation. So I tell someone, I'll tell her.
Yes. Thank you. You're great. Yeah.
Yes. And she doesn't care about that, really.
Right.
Because to her, it's doing that matters. So, go paint the house. That's going to be taken more as love. And I think bridging those issues are difficult. But I think if both people are on board, then, the ship can sail.
Exactly.
It's just in those relationships where it's only one person that's, making the effort. I think those are the kind of ships that are going to end up on a desert island.
Right.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah, but I mean, we're both trying. But for like I said, we waited so long that made our issues so much more pronounced than they needed to be.
Well, and I feel like a lot of the time it seems like kind of the domino or the trigger effect.
Right.
A lot of it builds on one another. And I mean, especially you guys worked together for a long, long time. When did you guys start therapy?
Well, it's only been in the last, I want to say,
It's awesome,
year or
though.
so.
I mean, I mean, it's huge to hear people that really want to fix, whatever's going on and staying committed.
Right.
And it had to be, was the first session so awkward? I remember my first session at a therapy. I was just like, oh gosh, I really don't want to do this, but I'm going to. I need to.
I think because I was the one that forced the issue, which I'm glad I did.
I'm
Normally,
glad I did too for
yeah.
you.
normally,
Really?
normally I don't. Normally I'm all about personal autonomy and just you have to do what's right for yourself. But in a relationship, obviously there has to be some give and take. Otherwise, it's not a relationship.
Right.
So I sort of forced that issue, and I'm glad I did. I think we're both communicating better as a result, and in a better place generally, and understanding each other. And I understand that the framework she has to construct internally is different. To understand this is different than the one I do. For me, understanding the abstract concepts helps me interact with her better. For her, she has to understand data points, specific things that I said or did, and sort of put them into a new framework. And I understand that's a slower process for sensors in general, especially introverted sensors, because every little thing builds up into their structures. That to rebuild it is this immense project. To take every data point and try to figure out how to make a different structure out of it. That takes takes a lot of time and energy for them to do.
I didn't know they did that. That's
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
Well, I have a meeting in 30
Okay,
minutes,
yeah.
but your name's Geoffrey, correct?
Yes, yes.
It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. Likewise, Liz. I really appreciate it, and I will email you that link.
Please
And
do.
have a good meeting and have a great day as well.
Thank you, you too.
Okay, all right. Bye.
Bye.